Well, again, this is delightful. Here we are on a Friday, the end of February, and we have so many of our wonderful friends in our community out here to talk about the music of Twin Peaks. And I have to thank our North Bend Downtown Foundation, Historic Snoqualmie Foundation, as well as North Bend Theater, and here we are at Boxley's. Boxley's and jazz in North Bend is a very popular thing. Danny, who's back at the soundboard there, founded the club. He's been playing piano since he was 14, put out first album when he was 19, and Boxley's in this spot has been here since 2019. They're part of the Jazz Club Northwest, which is a nonprofit foundation that helps pay the musicians that work with students, and they also just host some really great music. But today, gosh, this is great. We have two legends in our Twin Peaks community here. Scott Ryan, who is the author of But There's Always Music in the Air. It is the music of Twin Peaks. It's all 297 tracks. Scott, who's a musician himself and a lover of music, really has some phenomenal insight about the tracks and the music that we love. And then we have Josh Eisenstadt. And Josh is a walking encyclopedia of everything you need to know about Twin Peaks and more. So we'll go ahead and get you started. Please give a round of applause to Scott.
Okay, well, I will start this off. I'm going to ask Scott some questions about his book, which is fantastic, by the way. I helped Scott a little bit on it, and I got to read the manuscript too as it was going through, and it is an incredible book. And I'm going to tell a part of my story here quick about the music. So I worked on the DVD extras for the season 2 DVD. I conducted a lot of the interviews. Well, a friend of mine, Adam, and I conducted a lot of the interviews, the majority of them for season 2, and then a lot of that was used in the Gold Box. And we were interviewing Tim Hunter at one point, who directed episode 4, episode 16, and episode 28. And he was talking about Lori Eschler, who was the music editor, and that she had a library of 200 tracks. He said 200, we know it's more. And that they would pull from. The directors would go to these tracks, and I think several other directors, Caleb Deschanel mentioned this too, that they would go to this and they'd pull these tracks. And I remember thinking, what I would give to have access to that library. I would give anything. And I remember asking Tim Hunter, do you have them, do you have them, do you have them? And he said, I might have something in storage. So he went to storage and we're waiting to hear. He said, I can't find them. Because he actually was going to look, and I'm thinking, oh, what I would give for that, It's like some of my favorite music in the world, and I have no access to it. So, when the archives came, it was, a gift. First, the season 2 and more soundtrack was one gift. And I remember driving over to, if anybody knows Doug Pub, Brian Cursor, also been, been in the Twin Peaks fandom world for a long time, and, had the Doug Pub Award, and is a great guy. So I remember driving to his place because he got an early release version of the season 2 and more soundtrack. Speeding out there, let's hear it. What's on it? What's on it? What's on it? What is Laura's Dark Boogie? We were trying to figure out what it all was from the titles. And then, the archives was just like a special gift, and that was David. I know that he did that as a gift to us because he knew how much it meant. But Scott talks a lot in his book, and I was going to start off with this question. Scott, you talk a lot in your book about the hope to have this stuff that is only digitally on the archive basically put out in a vinyl form, CD form, something for future generations. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what your goal is with the book for that?
Yeah, and that is what started this book. I'm a big vinyl collector, and I think it sounds better. I know you all want to stream your music, bless your little hearts, but I don't stream music. I'm like the only one. And so I had this idea percolating throughout April and May of last year where I was like, I want there to be a vinyl box set of Twin Peaks music. And when an idea keeps going through my head, I try to bat it away, and it wouldn't go away. So I emailed Sabrina Sutherland and I said, I want to pitch you an idea. You will produce a vinyl box set, and I'll curate it and write the liner notes. And I thought, this is a great idea. And Sabrina responded and said, all Twin Peaks music has been released on vinyl. And so who tells Sabrina Sutherland she is incorrect? Because she's never wrong. So I just kind of nicely went back and said, actually, that's not really true. And she responded and said, all Twin Peaks music has been released on vinyl. Thanks for the idea, you know. And I started my book the next day. Because I thought, if they don't know that all of it isn't out, then how many other people, like how many people here knew that 75% of all Twin Peaks music you can't hear? Good job. In 2011 and 2012, what Josh was saying, David Lynch and really Dean Hurley, there's two heroes, and that's Dean Hurley and Laurie Eschler. If you don't know who they are after you read my book, you will know they are the heroes of the music of Twin Peaks. And they started to release them on davidlynch.com, but that's all gone now. And so like all of you are listening to Apple Music and Spotify and whatever, none of these songs are available there. So old guys like me who have these MP3s on their external drive, when I get sucked into the drawer knob of the future, my kids are throwing that stuff in the trash can. And 75% of Angelo Badalamenti's work will no longer exist on the planet once us old folks are gone. And so the book is a plea to Warner Brothers, Paramount, now David Lynch's estate or Angelo's estate to get these songs protected because it's really important.
Yeah.
And an applause right then would, I think.
Those big flashing sides.
Yeah,
I think
we
applause
have
sounds like
them.
they used to have in the game shows.
Not for me, but for the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Scott, let's also talk about another interesting thing about this is that that we learned that you'll learn in Scott's book. I don't want to spoil it too much, but this is one interesting fact. A lot of the music for The Return was actually not composed for The Return. So, for instance, you know, the Fireman track and some others. Is there any that you would like to tell the story about that's in your book, or that isn't in your book,
Well,
about one of those tracks?
Yeah, obviously for me, the Twin Peaks archive release was so important, and that's what was the driving portion of me writing this book. But my favorite chapter in the book is the Return chapter, because that's where I learned a ton of stuff. And that is that, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it might only be like 3 tracks. Do you remember? Like, it's so small that Angelo actually wrote for The Return. I think it's the one where the little boy gets run over.
Accident Farewell theme.
And
Heartbreaking.
yeah, Heartbreaking was another one, but most of them came from other places because Angelo and David wrote all the time when they could get together. And Dean Hurley's job was to comb through just hours and hours of DAT tapes looking for things that could be used in The Return. And like The Chair, which is the scene where Betty Briggs gives Bobby and the sheriff the message from Major Briggs. And I think this is crazy. That song was written for a Broadway musical called Tesla that David and Angelo were going to work on. I've never heard of that in my life. Like, I had no idea that was even maybe gonna happen. And so that is just crazy. So much of The Return came from just things that they had worked on over time.
Yeah. And there's also that story too about David basically rewatching the final episode of season 2 and saying, "Why did I put so much music in here?" And that's part of the reason why, you know, if everybody notices, you know, the 3rd season is quieter.
Right, and I noticed that the music is the most important part of Twin Peaks to me. It matters so much, and it does to 3 other people. And I think that also feels really validating. But when I watched the parts 1 and 2 when they aired, and it hit me really hard when you saw the Red Room and there wasn't music. And I was like, what is going on? Because obviously there's where we're from, the birds sing a song. And I think my favorite joke in my book, I'm not gonna do it, but I have a really good rewrite of Where We're From, the Birds Sing a Pretty Little Song, of how David feels about it now. But I was just like, where's the music? And basically what happened, Dean Hurley shares this story. Again, this was something I had never heard before, and I know Josh said he hadn't, and I'm like, if Josh doesn't know it, then my book's got things that are new. And basically, David and Mark wanted to watch episode 29 up at David's house when they were, well, Dean didn't know why, they hadn't announced what they were doing, but they just said, we're gonna screen episode 29, can you set it up? And when David and Mark came down, David was like, he just did not like it. He said, I don't know why I used that much music, it's horrible, we're not gonna do that. And that was just set from there, and I also interviewed Mark Frost for the book, and he corroborated it, that David, because Mark said, like, well, you directed it. Like, it was David's episode. Dean didn't tell David, but he disagreed, and I disagree. I think the score for 29 is perfect. It needs all that music because, I
love it. I think it works perfectly, and we also had spoken about that episode 29 has more music, greater percentage of music than any other episode in the whole series.
Yeah, I because I'm obsessive, I divided out what percentage episodes had of music, and episode 29 has the most percentage of music. I don't remember what it is right now because I'm not Josh, but it's like 74% of the episode has a score.
And by the way, I can't relate at all to being obsessive, so I don't know what that's like, Scott.
It's just me.
Yeah, I don't know what it must be you. I have no idea what that would be like,
Yeah.
obsessing over anything.
Of course.
Yeah.
So it does have the most music in it, but you needed it because I miss it in season 3. I think it's weird for me to be in the red room and not have the music. And you can have one of the things that I noticed is, like, if you take Cooper's Dream in episode 2 and you have the Dance of the Dream Man, it's a song you can hum. Like, I feel like all of us could sing the Dance of the Dream Man. Boom, 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 boom. But then if you compare that with Laura's Dark Boogie, which is what scores Laura's entry into the Red Room in Fire Walk with Me, you can't hum that song. You can recognize portions of it, but and to me, one of the things in doing the book that I talk about is that it's because Cooper's is kind of in control of that moment, and Laura is not. She's spinning out of control. It's a dark boogie for her. And then when you get to the return, there's an absence of music. And I think it's because Cooper has been trapped there for 25 years. There's no birds singing anymore. So while I miss the music, I think it fit David's version in all 3 iterations between the original series Fire Walk with Me and the return at how he used music.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also in the return, his use of source music. Like I was actually talking to a friend of mine earlier today about the introduction of Mr. C and the Money Magnolias track slowed down on the way up. And I think, and then of course, and just kind of the effectiveness of that, another big moment in the return is that when we hear Laura Palmer's theme, when Bobby comes in part 4, the power of that, because we haven't heard it. So we get that and the power of it. And then of course, the one time in the actual show where we hear the Twin Peaks theme, when Cooper gets back up and says, I am the FBI, it actually in a way puts more power to it. The fact that when it comes up, it's at very specific moments. And what do you make, Scott, too, of that kind of use of the kind of selective use and kind of the power of it being more sparse?
Well, I will say that I think every single person I interviewed for the book, including Mark Frost, singled out the Bobby moment in the return when I would ask them about it. And Mark Frost said, again, from David just really being disappointed in episode 29, they were like, we're not going to be nostalgic. We don't want people to be, you can't go home. That's the whole point of the return. And so they didn't want us to go home. Dean Hurley tells a great story in the book where he said the first time you got to the sheriff's station, Dean was prepping. Dean is the sound engineer. Is that what his credit is in the return? I don't know if it's engineer. It's like that design or something. But it's his job basically to get everything for David that he thinks he's going to want to use. And so he said the first time they got to the sheriff's station, he went immediately to Grady Tate and brought up the solo percussion and set it in, and he was all excited, and you've got that little cymbal going, and he was so excited, and David immediately came in and went, delete. And it's because we're not supposed to feel that way when we go to the sheriff's station. He doesn't want you thinking, oh, we're back, it's Twin Peaks. But obviously with Bobby, and as you say when he says, I am the FBI, you know, there's so much emotion coming from us because then we get that taste of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and it's the combination of having Cooper back and then having the Twin Peaks theme at the same time. And you know, it's the withholding things and then the bringing it forward. You know, the Cooper, we're waiting for Cooper to wake up and he's woken up, and now here's the Twin Peaks theme, which we haven't heard other than the credits. So it's just like this big, and I think that's why it gets the reaction it gets. I mean, I remember I would host screening parties at my place every week when it aired. And I'd always have a no talking rule. I think you were one of those guys. I think you were.
I was, but I wouldn't talk anyway.
That's true. That's true.
I agree with you on that. No talking, no phone. Don't
Yep.
ever get your phone out when you're watching David Lynch stuff.
Yeah, phones off, no talking. And I remember when that episode aired, and when Cooper said, I am the FBI, people stood up and cheered, and I said, exception granted. Because it was just such a powerful thing, you couldn't not stand up and cheer. But I kind of see what David's doing, because they withholding it then when it happens. And I also agree with Scott too that you can't go home again is a big theme, and literally we see that at the end. You know, everything is different. Once we cross, everything will be different.
And one of the things, you know, talking about part 18 that really surprised me, I mean, I can't hear it, and you know, the way I do my books is I don't want my opinion necessarily to come in. It's you read the words of the people I interview. I don't fact check them. I'm not trying to push them. This is what they remember. Dean Hurley says Angelo composed music for Cooper and Carrie Page's Drive, because I asked about the song Night that's on the soundtrack. I said, where's Night in, and he said it's not in the return. So that's a bonus song that Angelo wanted on the soundtrack. And I said, why didn't they just use it for the Drive? Like, it kind of fits Night. And he said, oh, Angelo wrote something for that, it's playing. And I think that's so weird. So the next time you watch that, to me, that does not sound like a song.
I've heard it. I noticed it for a long time, and it's not really musical. It's more like sound design. But I've actually noticed it, and it is eerie as can be. When you hear it, it's like this hollow, eerie sound.
Well, I mean, I can hear it, but I can't believe that's composed. Like, that's just weird.
I thought it was sound design.
Right.
I always thought it was sound design, like subtle sound design. But I was kind of shocked when I didn't know that either. That Angelo composed that. That's another new fact.
Yeah.
Because I always noticed it, but I assumed it was sound design that David and Dean did. You know, I never.
Yeah, because it sounds like an open mic to me, like that.
Yeah.
It's like a. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an ominous whoosh. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
So I think that's pretty fascinating. I mean, ominous whoosh sounds like a book title.
Yeah, maybe you might have an author that wrote that here somewhere.
I know the guy.
Yeah, I think I might have met him too. Yeah.
So
Anybody that doesn't have that book though, get it because it's great. Even though you know I don't know the author.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We're just saying
We don't
that
know
out of nowhere.
It is a great book.
And so that's a lot about Dean. The other person is Laurie Eschler. How many people know what Laurie Eschler did on Twin Peaks? I mean, after you read my book, you'll realize she was incredible. All the things that you think Angelo did, it really was Laurie Eschler.
Yeah.
So Angelo would compose the music, but Laurie selected it. She put it on there. A song like Laura's Dark Boogie, Angelo did not compose that song. So it has a little bit of Al Regni's saxophone, it can have Ron Carter's bass, and Kenny Landrum's keyboards, but those are just tracks. And Laurie Eschler would mix them together, and with David there, obviously. But her work on Twin Peaks is crazy, and I'm embarrassed to say, as someone who loved the music, I had no idea who she was. The first interview I did for the book was Dean Hurley, and he said he thought this was a horrible idea for a book. He told me right away, if I saw this book, I would never buy it. And I was like, oh, thank you. And I said, that doesn't affect me at all. I never sell my books. That's my specialty. But he said, if you're doing a book like this at all, it would have to have Laurie Eschler. And I didn't know who she was, and she was the music editor. So she worked from the pilot all the way, episode 1 through Firewalk with Me, and also did the pilot of On the Air. And David Slusser was the music editor for the pilot and Wild at Heart. But Laurie's contribution, it's going to blow your mind, like who this person is and all that she. And have you met Laurie?
Oh yeah, many times. I first got to know Laurie back in 2013. She's also a super nice person. I've known Laurie for a while, and she's definitely an unsung. I always call her the unsung hero of Twin Peaks. And like I mentioned, when we were doing the season 2 interviews, that's when all the directors were praising Laurie. I heard her name again and again and again. Tim Hunter, Caleb Deschanel. I believe Dwayne also had mentioned Laurie. I mean, I heard her name again and again. Because, for instance, like, does everybody remember, let's go back to episode 29, the scene where Nadine regains, remembers who she is, and, 35, you moron, and all that whole scene, where are my trait runners? Where are my trait runners? Now you notice that scene is New Shoes combined with Shelley. So that combination of those two, and it combines beautifully. And then where by the end, New Shoes is faded out and Shelley is in full swing. Like stuff like that, that's Laurie. That's Laurie who would take these tracks and figure out how to combine them. Or episode 17, the different versions of Audrey's Prayer mixing in at Leland's Wake. All of that was Laurie and how she would take these tracks, combine basically stem elements in some cases, and put them together. So she really is a major part of the music. And Laurie is she's also a major music lover that knows about music of all kinds. If you're a music lover, you could talk to Laurie for hours. She knows everything.
She really does. She was so helpful to the book. I was sending her tracks and saying, did you do this or did Angelo compose this? And she would say, those are 3 different things that we put together. And, if you think of like Hank Jennings and the song that they play with Hank, it's because she knew to put that song there. It's not like, now it's called Hank's theme. So if you get the archive, it's Hank's theme. But it wasn't Hank's theme. It was probably, Piano 74 or something. It's a made up name. But she used it in the first time. So now another director comes in and there's a Hank theme. So she's saying, oh, we use this theme. And like Audrey's Prayer that you mentioned is used in episode 8 when Audrey's praying to Cooper, come find me at One-Eye Jack's. Well, then when you get to episode 17 and Audrey is saying goodbye to Cooper, which she thinks is, forever, and it turned out it kind of was. They have like one scene together for all of time. She brings back Audrey's Prayer. And those were the things that she did with the director. And she did say David Lynch signed off on everything. He in every single episode. So she's just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Seconded. She's just a major part of the whole thing.
So I love interaction with people. So I want to talk about a song you want to hear about. So
yes.
Who's got a song they want to hear about? Go ahead, all the way in the back.
I don't want to sound like a total novice, but Sycamore Trees,
Oh.
I noticed it in Firewalk with Me, and I'm just really curious about the history of it.
Oh, you asked the question, question.
I swear I didn't plant it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Scott, you have to. Let me start off with one thing. This may or may not be known, but Sycamore Trees dates way back. The lyrics date way back to very early David Lynch. We'll start there. You want to take it from there, Scott?
So, first of all, I love you. You're my favorite person ever. My entire book is based on Sycamore Trees.
Okay.
So the whole book is the mystery of Sycamore Trees. And I say to the reader, don't skip around and cheat and just read about the Sycamore Trees, because you'll be, the book is a little lengthy, to be honest with you. And it's kind of the driving mystery of how does this song happen. So thank you for asking about it. But to answer your question, to me, the fact that Sycamore Trees is on Firewalk with Me is just like Douglas Firs. It's so Twin Peaks. Like, why is it on Firewalk with Me? It's not even in it. It's from episode 29 is where they sing it. So of course it's on Firewalk with Me. Now technically, the instrumental is in it for 3.6 seconds. And it's just the bass. There's just like boom, boom. And then they're like, okay, we can put it on the soundtrack. But basically when Leland is dumping the body and when he comes into the red room and you see the one-armed man and the man from another place, it is playing Ron Carter's bass from Sycamore Trees. I mean, that's it.
I always wondered if there was like a deleted scene where someone like sings it, and I was like, oh,
No.
Nope, it's just that. So I think David just probably wanted to get it out because it had been in episode 29. But for me, what started the mystery of this, and for years, every time I interviewed anyone who was in episode 29, I would say, like, everyone says that David Lynch improv'd episode 29, and they would say, yep. Like when I talked to Kenneth Walsh from, who played Wyndham Earl, he said David would just be standing over there calling out lines, you would say them. They improv'd the whole Red Room scene, but I thought, how can you improv Jimmy Scott out of nowhere? You can't do that in a whole song and a recording. So I would ask people, and that became, every single person I interviewed had one piece of the mystery of Sycamore Trees. And at first Dean, and when I first talked to him, he sort of brushed it off. And then luckily I got Dean Hurley really interested in the Sycamore Trees mystery after like bothering him like maybe 5 or 6 times. And in the last chapter of the book, you get the answer. Josh, do you think it's the answer? Josh has read the book and was on.
I think it's the answer.
Do you think we solved it?
I think
or
it's solved in a Lynchian way,
Right.
where we know instinctually that it's correct, but is there room, potentially?
I mean,
Room to dream, potentially?
Yeah,
But-
I'm pretty confident that, I mean, we know some things, but it really is a big mystery
It
about
is.
it. And that's just one song. That's what I say in the book. Like, I just happened to pick one out of 290 songs because it's one of my favorites, and I was curious how that could ever happen on a TV show where you have this song and you'd have to record it and it's at the end of the season. Like, how did this happen? But you'll be surprised. I think it's a really cool thing, and it's gonna make you wanna hear something so badly.
Oh, yes.
And
Oh, yes.
I didn't get to hear it, but there.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
I want
we'll
to.
Hope. We're
but
gonna hope.
We'll keep that a secret. That'll be a
Yeah,
surprise
because
for
to
the
me
book.
it is the driving thing of the book, so I don't want to give it away.
Yeah, and it is a good reveal too. It's a very, very good reveal.
Another song.
Oh, one
Sure.
more thing about Sycamore Trees. Sorry.
That
One
was
more thing-
Charlene. You're gonna make Charlene?
I'm gonna make- just for a minute. In Sycamore Trees and Fire Walk With Me, when Leland enters the Black Lodge, next time you watch it, if you listen very carefully, because when they recorded Sycamore Trees, they didn't record really separate tracks. So when they did the instrumental, if you listen very carefully, turn your volume way up, you'll hear Jimmy Scott's voice very faint when Leland enters the Red Room and Fire Walk With Me. I don't know how many people have noticed that. If anybody has, please raise your hand, or am I just completely... Stephen has, okay. So, yes, just notice that. You'll listen real closely, you'll hear Jimmy Scott's voice bleeding through a little bit. Okay, Charlene, sorry.
Moving Through Time on the Firewalk With Me soundtrack is probably one of my favorite of all of David's music. I could probably listen to it on loop like for hours. So I'm curious if there's anything cool about that song and how it came to be.
So that is Angelo wrote that. I didn't really discover anything about that one, and I think it's also interesting that never, there's not like a Twin Peaks archive of it, there's not a second take of it. The only version of it that exists is in Fire Walk with Me, and it's that did come out on the soundtrack, which is great. And I agree with you. I think the work that Angelo did in Fire Walk with Me, I mean, I'm partial to the straight story, but I think it's his best score as far as a piece of jazz, as we're staying, sitting in a jazz club. Moving Through Time captures Laura, right where Laura is right at that moment.
So impactful.
I mean, it's incredible, and it is one of the most beautiful pieces. One of the things I learned is Kenny Landrum is the one that's playing the piano. It's not Angelo. And I do interview Kenny, and he talks about how that would work, where Angelo and David would basically be like in the studio telling, just like saying things that David says, like strange ways of, more broccoli or whatever, and then you have to react to that. But I agree, it's a beautiful song.
Big chunks of plastic.
Yeah. Good. Any other songs that people want?
I'd like to know if you have anything to say about the You and I song.
Oh.
Well, Josh and I are now going to perform that.
Just you and
I always wanted
together.
I always wanted to, like, at a Twin Peaks event, like, start it by making everyone stand up and say that we're going to sing the Twin Peaks national anthem, and then just make everybody sing to Just You, but haven't quite had the nerve to do it yet. But I actually like the song. I know so many people don't, but if you really like the music of David Lynch, that is a David Lynch song. What I did discover about that song, it's one of the only sessions that was not done in New York City. So Just You, Americana, and Drug Deal Blues were 3 songs that they were recorded on the same day, and they were done in LA, not with Vinnie Bell, Kenny Landrum, Al Regney, and Grady Tate. It's a different band that they just went and they did it that week when they were filming episode 9, sorry. And they went in the studio and they changed the key on James Marshall. That's why he's singing in that voice. It wasn't like when they practiced on the set, he wasn't singing that high, and then they went in, they had to change the key, and David just wanted him to sing that way.
Yeah, here's a story about how it came to be too. So this comes from James Marshall. So basically James, plays guitar, and he was sitting kind of on the steps of his trailer one day when they were filming, playing guitar, just kind of, strumming. And David walks by, hears him doing it, and says, "James, we need you to perform in a scene. We're gonna get." And so then apparently Angelo came out and started writing, I guess, on the piano in the Hayward living room. That's the story that I heard. Started just kind of trying to compose something out, and David wanted a real 50s feel, and that's kind of how it came to be. Was James was playing his guitar, David walked by and heard it, and of course this is the kind of thing David does a lot. I mean, you see Harry Dean Stanton doing Red River Valley in part 10, so that kind of thing is something that he'll do. He's David is always very spontaneous, so that's kind of how that came to be.
And I know a lot of people give that song some gruff, but if you look at that scene, because they're singing that song and it's like slow and it's repetitive, that's why you're so scared when Bob comes over the couch, because you have let your guard down. When you're watching that scene, you're not thinking about Bob. You had forgotten that Maddie had seen the carpet before, and you're watching that, and it's so slow and it's kind of kitschy, and you're like, what's going on? And you're just not expecting. I mean, I don't even like that Steven's sitting on that couch, because I'm like, I'm afraid someone's gonna come over it. I mean, to me, that's the single scariest scene in all of Twin Peaks. And it works because of Just You. So when people want to ignore that song, I think you're making a mistake, because that's why we have one of the most iconic scenes.
Agreed 100%. Yeah, if you picture without that scene, if the scene just started with Donna getting the phone call from Harold Smith and then Bob came, it would be far less effective.
Right.
And it's kind of, again, it's a David Lynch thing that he likes to contrast the innocence with the darkness. So the idea that you've got these three teenagers, well, Maddie's older, but, two teenagers and then somebody in their early 20s kind of doing this innocent song, and just kind of that innocence of youth, then contrasted by the darkness coming at you. It's a completely Lynchian thing. It's the same kind of idea that's in part 8 with the innocence of the youth, with the young Sarah Palmer and the boy walking home, and then the frog moth. It's just a Lynchian thing to contrast those two things, and it makes it, I agree, 100% much more effective.
Definitely. Go ahead in the back on the couch.
I hope this isn't like too off topic, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the timing and the creation and like the similarities, like all the tracks that are used from Industrial Symphony #1 and how those kind of crisscross with, the creation of the Twin Peaks music.
Another, just like, you're like right on my book. It's like, did I plant these people? I don't know how this happened. I mean, yeah, Josh is gonna ask me later. So that was one of the things in working on this. I had to cover Wild at Heart, Industrial Symphony, and Twin Peaks, and Floating into the Night. They're all together. There's no difference. Like when I talked to Kenny Landrum, who again, he played the piano, he doesn't distinguish between Floating into the Night and Twin Peaks or Wild at Heart. He can't, it's been so long. They didn't know what they were doing the music for. It was all the same. So they were working on it at the same time. As far as I go through 1989, I think is my chapter 1 or chapter 2. And Josh was a huge help for this. I could never have pieced 1989 together without Josh's help, and Dean Hurley as well got us some dates that we needed. But if you think you're busy, you should see what David Lynch did in 1989. It's insane.
Yeah, it is. I feel, actually makes me feel completely inadequate, because I don't know if I've done in a 3-year period what he did in a 1-year period at my busiest. It's insane. I don't know how he did it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, basically, he didn't even know that Industrial Symphony was even going to be a thing, I think in September. And then by November, it's over. They did it. And I interviewed the A&R guy from Floating into the Night. Do you remember his name? Why can't I think it was Laffey? But
Yeah,
I think
Kevin
Laffey. He was the A&R guy that basically signed David, Angelo, and Julie. And he's in the book, and he said that this place called him and were like, we want to give David Lynch a chance to do like a music thing. And Kevin Laffey's like, he's got an album coming out, he's prepping Wild at Heart, and he's writing Twin Peaks. He doesn't have time, but I'll ask him. And then David Lynch said, I want to do it, and it's called Industrial Symphony Volume 1, The Dream of the Brokenhearted. And Kevin's like, okay. And he's like, I have no proof, but I think David just made that up right at that moment. And within 2 months, they had done it. And so, yeah, a lot of Twin Peaks music. That's why there's a lot in the pilot from Industrial Symphony and Floating into the Night, because they only had written, everyone in the book says 3 songs, but it has to be 4 for Twin Peaks. So they pull all of that over. So I connect all of those things. And again, Wild at Heart was the same way. It's all the same.
And if you look, just to give you a quick breakdown of 1989, February he shoots the pilot through March. Then in July he goes back to film the European ending. He then films Wild at Heart, while kind of supervising and working on the scripts for Twin Peaks. And then in the end of December he goes and he films episode 2 after doing Industrial Symphony in November, while coming out with Floating into the Night. Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. So that's one of the chapters that I go through the month and say what David Lynch did every month and what they were working on and what he knew at the beginning. Because at the beginning of that year, he doesn't know that Twin Peaks is going to air. He doesn't know about Wild at Heart. He doesn't know about Industrial Symphony. They had recorded some of Floating into the Night, but not all of it. And then all of that stuff is out, like either the latter part of that year or the early part of the next year. I mean, that's just ridiculous. No wonder he could do 18 parts at
Exactly.
The Return.
Yeah, exactly.
It was easy for him. At
That was
point.
nothing at that point after going through.
And the
it,
same
you know.
goes of Angelo. Imagine having to create all of that music, because he's scoring Wild at Heart and working with Julie Cruz. And what they did was incredible.
And the fact that it's as good as it is. I mean,
Right.
you think you take most people, and if somebody was forced to do that much in a year, it would feel rushed, or would feel, but it isn't. It's some of his greatest stuff. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Steven?
Do you have a newfound appreciation for a track you didn't know that you now love after the research, besides Sycamore Trees?
Attack of the Time Weasel.
I know I always love Attack of the Time Weasel. I mean, I do, but it's funny I can't think of what it's called. What is the song where they hit the little boy?
Accident Farewell Theme.
Accident Farewell Theme. Dean Hurley tells the story, and it's lengthy. It's gonna blow your mind.
Yeah.
It's incredible how that song was written. And so I would say that really, and that is a song that was actually written for The Return. So that one probably rose for me a lot. But one of the things that I say about Attack of the Pine Weasel, and throughout, especially season 2 of Twin Peaks, the worse the storyline, the better the music. I mean, it's crazy. Like some of the worst storylines that you're just like, what? Like the music is incredible for. And the reason is because they have nothing to do with each other. So Angelo scored very little of Twin Peaks to Twin Peaks. They wrote music, and then it's sitting there, and then Laurie Eschler is finding it. And she's the one that's putting it with there. So I don't have any proof of this because Angelo's not here, but I kind of think that there was this wealth of music, and when you get to that, we won't say bad part of season 2, but let's just say less great. I think they just had great music, and you're introducing these new characters, so they become Lana's theme or Mayor. Like I think the Milford Wedding, that music is spectacular. Do I necessarily want to watch the Milford Wedding? Not so much. But so I think that has a lot to do with it, that they just had this wealth of music, because Laurie said, like, between seasons 1 and 2, she got just this data dump of new music. And I'm sure while you're coming around the bend, and they kind of knew Twin Peaks was done, they're just kind of burning off songs.
I've also got a story, this is about another track, but that I remember Caleb Deschanel told that involves Laurie Eschler. When he filmed the Louise Dombrowski scene, I'm sure everybody remembers that, the hook rug dance. So he was doing that and didn't have a track for it. And that's actually when I remember when he mentioned Laurie Eschler was going to that, archive that Laurie Eschler had and asking Laurie, do you have something that fits for this dance? And then that's when she came up, found that, amongst all the tracks that she had, the hooker rug dance, and threw that to Caleb, and Caleb's like, perfect, that's it. So that was another example of that, and that hooker rug dance, and of course it comes back along with one of the Mayor Milford Wedding tracks, in a scene that I personally love, and I know a lot of people do too, the diner scene with Gordon and Shelley and Cooper and Annie, where we go from the Milford Wedding track to the hook rug dance, and it's just a beautiful scene.
Yeah, and I do interview Dwayne Dunham in the book, and I've always called that the happy scene, and it's my all-time favorite Twin Peaks scene, is Cooper telling the penguin joke. And I said to Dwayne, I believe this, he saved season 2 with that scene. How many people are original Twin Peaks fans that watched it when it was on? Yeah, oh, look at this, pretty good. So you remember the pain of just watching the ratings go down, and the war coming and it being preempted, and you're just like, oh, this thing I love is going to be taken away. But when I remember watching that episode and loving it, and just like, my Twin Peaks is back, this is going to save it, and it didn't.
Well, little did we know, 25 years later, right?
Right, definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, you're talking about how
No. So Dwayne talks about this. He said, as a director, because I said, why doesn't everyone do this? Like, why doesn't this just happen? And he said, do you know how hard it is? You've got 7 days, and not only am I prepping shots and doing this, I have to listen to cassette after cassette. And they were, it was a different time. Now they would all be digital and you'd double click, but they literally, every director got cassette tapes. And you'd have to fast forward and be like, do I like this one? Do I like this one? So that's why Laurie Eschler was so important, because she knew all of them. So she
just knew it.
Yes.
So if they said this scene, someone is crying, she just knew what to go to. They didn't record specific moves.
The funny thing about that is the directors that I interviewed were kind of salty, like especially Tim Hunter. Tim Hunter was kind of angry that Angelo wouldn't score. But what's really funny is the episode that has the most two-picture score was directed by an unknown named Mark Frost. And I kind of tried to push Mark about it. I'm like, you were the boss, and it's kind of funny that your episode, because the mill fire, Kenny Lindrum said, was the single hardest thing they had to do, because it had to fit. And it's not like now where every studio is set up with a monitor. They're in New York, it's out in LA. And then also Nadine's suicide attempt is an original, it was made for that. And Mark didn't even have an idea, because he was like, oh, I just asked for it, and then it got there, and I was like, you were the boss, buddy. Like, the other directors didn't get to do that. So Mark Frost's episode has the most new music that was actually scored to the picture. Everyone else, I'm sure they would have done it for David too, but I think David knew what the music was. Because I even asked Laurie about episode 14, when Maddie is killed. Do we still do spoilers? Are we worried about spoilers?
I think we're okay with season 2 spoilers.
Because I
If
thought
anybody doesn't know who killed Laura Palmer, now's the time to leave.
Exactly. But I asked if Angelo scored that, and even that wasn't. That was pieced together through other tracks.
One more,
Mr. Thorne has a question.
Oh yes, sorry, John. One quick thing, and then.
Back here have had their hands up for a while, and you're only doing the front.
I only like the people in the front. Look, John, you're gonna wait. Tell us who's in the back. I mean, I did ask the one lady who asked about.
I got one more thing to say about what Scott said.
Do you want me to get in more trouble? Carl's mad about this.
Carl's mad, but we'll get 1 second. One quick
There's a
thing.
hand here and a hand over here that have been up for about a half hour.
Oh
And
my
let's please get to their questions.
I mean, come on. Who's running this thing?
We will. I want to say one more thing about what Scott's saying. The scene where Nadine commits suicide, interestingly enough, was originally supposed to. Mark Frost wanted to use Patsy Cline's "Crazy" originally for that song. And the second thing, anybody can come up to me and tell me later, but the mill fire is used in one other scene in season 2. If anybody can tell me what that is, I'll be highly impressed. It's not going to be in the trivia game. Don't worry. Okay. I'll tell you at the end of the panel.
We'll get to you in a second. There's someone up here. Sorry.
The sound of the ceiling fan is kind of a recurring theme throughout all the versions, and in particular, it's really showcased in Firewalk with Me. I feel like, especially that scene where Laura's running down the stairs, and it's often blended with music. And I'm not good at names of songs, but whatever song that is playing with the backwards violin, the spooky violins. That's such an intense song, and I was wondering if you had insights, maybe where what the regular version of those sounds came from. Or...
Firewood.
Yeah, they do call it firewood. That is what David and Angelo considered when they would get together and do these long series of music that kind of has no tune. And then they could use it in multiple ways. But I'm glad that you brought up the violins. First of all, the pulsating stuff of the fan is not Angelo. That was a guy named Doug Murray who did the sound design.
It's interesting because that song is in the same BPM as the fans. So that Foley world mixing with the music editing was very cool.
Very cool, and David did that himself. So Lori would bring up things, and she said that David had this tool here, and he would crank it up or crank it down or fade it up and fade it down. It was her job to give him that. So all of that stuff was done live while they're watching the scene go by, and they're putting that in. But what you're talking about, the spooky violins, I was so curious about that too, and it's called Ponticello violins. And Lori said it's right up by the bridge of the violin, where the person like kind of saws, and in the book I say, near the sounds of sawing woods. And they're up there, and that was making that sound, and then they would reverse it. So it's not just that, it's also reversed. It was the same with the song called C Mole, which is the classical piece in the train. I bought that record off Discogs, and I tried to find everywhere where it is, and I couldn't find it. So I said, Lori, I can't find it. I'm listening to C Mole. It's the exact people. And she said, well, did you try playing it backwards and in reverse? And I said, I did not. So all of that is manipulated. It's backwards, it is over other tracks, and they use things that they own, so they can do that. So they can totally manipulate it in any way David wants. And in fact, this is off topic, but I think this is fun. Dean Hurley said for The Return that he saw someone online in the scene where Sarah Palmer is watching the animals eat. They could hear David talking, and they thought, oh, it means something. And Dean Hurley was like, I didn't think someone would speed it up. We just took something that we owned so we wouldn't get sued, so we could manipulate it in any way. And it just happened to be from David's album. Who else had their hand up for 12 years?
25 years.
So much.
Meanwhile,
Oh, it was Jeff Moore? I don't care if he asks a question. I mean, gosh, I thought it was someone important.
tell us about Circle Brown, where
Here we have the prop master of season 2 of Twin Peaks, Jeff Moore.
Part of all those music scenes that you talked about, and one of the questions that I have is Falling, when Julie Cruz, we shoot the video. Now, we were in the Roadhouse, and Julie was there for a couple of days. We were in that set stage. Did we, on season 2, actually shoot the Falling video? I don't remember because there was so much going on, and I was very busy. And in the red room, also when Scott came up, and no one knew what was happening. I just knew at the last minute, a couple of days before, that David wanted a really unique microphone for that scene, not knowing it was Jimmy Scott, not even knowing who Jimmy Scott was, sort of did, my assistant did. I don't know if I was a part of that Falling video when we shot it there, and it was all red, as we all know. Do you guys know if that was shot on that night?
It was, and
I thought so.
I actually brought up, because I was curious about that too. So what I did was I brought up Julie's episode 14, and I brought up the Falling thing on my computer, and she has one hair that's errant in both. So it had to be shot at the exact same time. There's no way, because I was like looking, and I was like, oh, the hair's messed up here, hair's messed up here. I'm glad you weren't the hairstylist, because I'd be busting you out.
And James, and his whole scene, you know, the guitar and girls singing and everything, was really kind of orchestrated by James and myself in what we saw on camera, the vintage equipment, the choice of guitar. These are things that James and I worked out. He told me exactly what he wanted. I knew where to go to get it. I think it was my biggest mystery. And then when we were doing that video for Falling, Julie was telling David about making earpieces for listening to monitors now, because we went from the old world of monitors on the floor in front of you, not being able to hear them. As a musician, you know what I'm talking about. To Julie telling David about these new things, which went straight into when David became Cole. And he had me, Jeff, come over, and he set me down with him and Julie. This is just a little story. And she gave me her information of who was making her earpieces to give. So that's how she was hearing herself on stage. Kind of a new thing in that time in 1990. And that's a little kind of an inside thing right there about.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about writing a book about this stuff?
I'm looking for a publisher. So, you know, so.
This is a bit. He's already doing a book for my publishing company. I planted the whole audience.
Thank you for answering the following question.
No, I'm. If you need to know what else you did in 1990, just I'm happy to tell you about that dinner at Denny's. Chris, and then we'll go Chris and John, and I guess we got 2 minutes, so you each get a minute.
Okay, here's a bit that didn't get in the book.
How do you know? You just bought it.
Because it's a personal story.
Oh, well, I knew about it.
So anyway, 1989 in November, Floating Into the Night came out months before Twin Peaks came out. I just said, I love that song, Mysteries of Love. I'm going to pick this up. That night, I took my date home, and I believe my daughter was probably conceived while listening to that song.
And that story is in the book. The question was.
There is nothing to do with that.
Go ahead.
Fire Walk With Me, the theme, apparently there's 2 versions, one with a sax and one with a trumpet. Did you find a lot of different versions of songs that were at least that much different?
So, I pick in the book as my all-time favorite, hands down, my all-time favorite song is the alternate version of Fire Walk With Me with the saxophone. And one thing that was super cool is I interviewed Al Regney. He played the saxophone on Dance of the Dream Man, all of Twin Peaks, and Fire Walk With Me. He said that Fire Walk With Me theme was one of his favorite things he ever did, and then he was like, and then they cut it. And it, you know, it's ended up being in the missing pieces, of course. We do get to hear it that way. But that particular song is what breaks my heart the most, that song is not going to be remembered. It's going to be nowhere. It's not on Apple Music, it's not on Spotify, it's not on vinyl, it's not on a CD. It'll just fade away unless someone steps up and does this.
It's on YouTube, isn't it?
That's so many people say that to me. It's on YouTube. The artist isn't getting paid for that. What quality did the person put it up on? Is it in the best quality? And as soon as a lawyer gets a sniff of it, it's taken down. And as I love to say, Leland Palmer was a lawyer. John, take us home.
Okay. 2 tracks, one you've already mentioned, that are famous tracks, didn't get released till later. One of them is The Hook Rug Dance. The other one is Deer Meadow Shuffle. Can you talk about, well, yes, Deer Meadow Shuffle.
Yeah, Deer Meadow Shuffle was written by David Slosser, who is another hero in the book. And the most interesting tidbit that I found out, it was really fascinating because when I was talking to David Slosser about Deer Meadow Shuffle, he said, oh yeah, you know, I wrote that for Philip Jeffries, and he gets off an elevator and he comes down and he walks through these doors, and I was like, what is he like, that's not it. And that's what it was written for. He didn't know it was going to be used as the Deer Meadow Shuffle. He wrote that song for David Bowie and the whole Philip Jeffries thing. And then when he saw the movie, that's what David explained to him, was the scene of Philip Jeffries. And then when they scored the movie, they used it to be for Sheriff Cable and stuff like that. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Do you think they added it to the return just so they could get it out on the soundtrack? That's always how I thought. It doesn't really fit.
Well, I don't know how y'all feel about it, but I'm pretty hard on the return in the book at where they use the music. I think they made some strange connections. Did I walk back almost saying this straight? And I did write this book before David passed, and so sometimes I wish I was a little softer now, but what are you gonna do? I'm sorry we went over 2 minutes. I don't want to hold anyone up. Thank you so much. Talk to me later, and I have some books if you want.
And I have a quick answer to the question I posed. The only time the no fire is used is episode 12, when the bodyguard turns the gun on Cooper and Truman when he's holding Audrey, and Hawk throws a knife in his back. That's the time it's used. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it a round of applause. Scott Ryan, Josh Eisenstadt. And thank you to Danny and Bill here at Boxley. Please return tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, the Twin Peaks Quintet. It's going to be a show you're not going to want to miss.